Welcome back, Field Science. We'll just continue our discussion about the fatal flaw. Sorry that the end got a little choppy there. The bell rang, and for some reason, I thought I had a prep period coming up, and a bunch of students started to gather outside my door and were clamoring to get in, so I got a little distracted. But yeah, so the man here that we're talking about, Paul Harris Jones, he went on to become an advocate for conservation of forests, but he was involved in this clearing operation in Nimkish Valley during its heyday, and it impacted him. One of the things that came up in this chapter has happened for Paul Harris Jones, and it started to happen for Grant Hadwin, and the author said this in the chapter. He said, if you're a logger, it's best not to think about what you're doing. Just get in there and do it. But if you start thinking too much, well, then you might start to have some thoughts, some conflicts. And that's what began to happen to Hadwin. Was really unpopular. And I sort of flashed this next slide up accidentally, but I had a personal experience like this when I was younger, starting at the age of about 11 years old until I was about 19 years old. I worked for my friend's father under the table. So I'm not allowed to say what the business was or where it was because it was illegal technically, but he would pay us to work at his family butcher. He was basically in the slaughterhouse. And I would work there in the summers, starting when I was 11, 12, 13, 14. I had a job at a supermarket, but I would still help out on the days that I had off in the supermarket because from 14, 15, 16, you can only work so many hours per week by law. So I would fill in the extra time that I wasn't allowed to work at the supermarket by going over to the butcher shop and working. And I got to be I think I was about 16 years old. And the work itself was what it is at most slaughterhouse. I mean, it wasn't brutal or anything, but you pick animals up sort of by their hind legs and you give them like a little shot with a stun thing to their temple, and it stuns them and they're unconscious, and then you kill them. And I didn't really have a problem with this, most of the years I worked, but I remember there was one day I was working at, it was getting towards the end of the day, and you would keep the animals sort of in a pen off to the side while they were waiting to come onto the kill floor. And I remember there was a pig didn't want to go onto the kill floor, and I sort of had to drag it out there. And anyway, I looked at the other pig that was waiting because these pigs came in together, so they obviously knew each other. And this is kind of a weird story, but I think it's relevant. I felt like in the moment, I was looking at the pig that was still in the pen, and it was like looking at me like it knew what was happening, like it knew everything that was going on here. And I had never really thought about that. If anything, I thought the animals were confused and didn't know anything that's going on. But the funny thing was, my father raised pigs. We always had a bunch of pigs on our farm, and we actually butchered them and ate them ourselves, like throughout the school, throughout the year, throughout the winter and during the school year. If we had pork chops or bacon or anything like that, they're always from our own pigs. So I was in charge of helping to take care of the pigs, and I knew how smart pigs were. Pigs are like real smart. They're like dogs almost. They're super smart. And I was looking at this pig, and I'm like, this pig knows what's going on here. And I knew my job was to kill it. I had to kill it next, and I did. But it really like impacted me somehow. And I remember telling my friend about it, and my friend was really confused. He was like, "What?" He's like, "What? You're talking to a pig?" I'm like, "No, I just felt like this pig knows what's going on." He's like, I don't know what you're thinking about, but you're thinking like way too much. Like, we just do this job. It's pretty much what he was telling me. This is what we do. And I said, yeah, but it somehow stuck with me because by the next summer, and I don't remember all the ins and outs and conversations because it was a long time ago. By the time I was 17, I asked to go work at a different plant that his father owned that dealt with dead stock. Now, dead stock is like if an animal dies on a farm, we would go pick it up, and you could still butcher the animal if it's only been dead, a couple of days or so. You just can't use the meat in people food. We would actually use it in dog and cat food, like canned dog and cat food is what the end product was. So guys, if you ever get tempted or dare to eat like canned dog food or cat food. Don't do that. But I had no problem with that, and I actually worked there for like the next year or two until I went off to college. And but it was interesting because it started to drive this little rift between my best friend and I. We were good friends. We've been friends since like 5th grade. And he didn't want to go work at the dead stock plant. He wanted to work with me, but he didn't want to go work at the dead stock plant. He wanted to stay in the livestock plant, but he really liked palling around with me. So he actually came down to the dead stock plant and started working with me, but he would tell me sometimes that they kind of resented it. He's like, I don't even know why we're down here. Like, I don't know why we're working at this plant when we were happy at the other plant. And I tell him, well, the whole story about the pig. And he's like, I just don't understand it. He's like, I really don't understand. Like, I don't get it. But because it happened to me, like, it made sense to me, and I understood why it didn't make sense to him. And I think as like the years went on, we actually became like, granted, we just kind of went off to college and did our own things, but I think it never really made sense to him. And I think there was like a point of friction there. I think even from my friend's father, he was kind of like, yeah, you can go work at the dead stock plant. I just don't like your reason for doing it. If you want to work at the dead stock plant, 'cause they actually paid a little bit more money because the work was a little grosser. But he was like, if you want to go work there for money, like, go ahead. He's like, I'm wondering why you're questioning what we do. Like, you're questioning in a sense, like our livelihood. I'm like, well, no, it's not that. I just think, I don't know. I didn't have good answers. I think that's kind of what happened to Hadwin here. So Hadwin's like going to the people who are in charge of killing trees. I was in charge of killing animals. People are in charge of killing trees. That's their job. And he's saying like, well, I think that we should do this in a different way. We should do this in a way that's maybe like a little more conscious, or we should leave some trees behind. It didn't make sense. And that's what I ran into with the meat processing thing. It just didn't make sense to the people who ran the plant and worked the plant. They're like, what are you talking about? I don't think Hadwin had good explanations for it. And at the time, in the 1980s, I think this really didn't make sense. And he actually ended up leaving his employer, Evans Wood Product, on bitter terms. And he began to work on his own. He was making railroad timbers and other wood products from the trees that were infected with the pine beetle. Things were tough, but Hadwin was sort of making it work there in Goldbridge because he didn't have a job with like a big lumber company anymore. This is a picture, guys, of the beetle-stained lumber. So when this first came out, the industry at the time said, no one's going to want this. This is ugly, and no one's going to want it. But it actually sells for a premium now because people like it. They like the color of it. That grayish blue stain is from the damage that the beetle causes to the pine tree. But you can see here some flooring. Some people find it really unique, really kind of rustic looking. Hadwin was ahead of his time. He was actually saying like, I think this lumber has a use. I think we can sell it as actual lumber. And he ended up building in his house in Goldbridge. He has beetle stained lumber in and around the house, because he thought it was pretty himself. But at the time, they said, well, it's not very good for anything, so you can make some railroad timbers out of it. That's what he was actually doing at his own little sawmill there. He tried to make it work. It was a rough time. The market changed in relation to some timber buying practice, timber demand from Japan. You know how these things work, this worldwide demand change. So Hadwin couldn't make it work. And he ends up moving to Kamloops, which is quite a bit different than this is not Kamloops here. I got a slide of it here. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. He ends up having to move to Kamloops. Kamloops, Alberta is really different than Goldbridge. I've not been to Goldbridge, but I've been pretty close to Goldbridge. This area looks like this. I've been to Kamloops. Kamloops looks like this. It's still really pretty. Both areas are pretty. You can tell from these pictures next to each other that they're really different. Kamloops is a small city. It's dry there, kind of high prairies and like dry mountains. Not a lot of trees. You can see here, it's the rainfall is different there, but this is what Hadwin was used to. This is where he wanted to live, but he had to move here because he needed to get a job, and he found a job out there with another timber company, but people said that maybe wasn't the greatest thing for him. And so in 1987, his life takes a sort of a disturbing turn. In this turn, the turn he took is that let me go back a couple slides here. He is sort of off on his own, doing his work, and he has this. It's been hard because not everyone has a real good sense of what happened here, but he has some kind of an experience here that changed him. And I'm really doing a bad job of describing it, so I'm just going to read it right from the book. It said, things were fairly well until the summer of 1987, when, shortly before his 38th birthday, his life took a disturbing turn. Hadwin had been on doing contract work for the timber company up in McBride, near the Alberta border, when he had come highly recommended, and Gene Runts, the company's woodlands manager, was impressed. He had been doing exceptional work, remembers Runts. Then he left for about 10 days between jobs, and when he came back, it was like he was a different person, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. His eyes looked like they weren't there anymore. It's one of those most shocking things that's ever happened to me in the forest industry. He talked to us and put his religious bent on the fact that what we were doing was wrong. He said he didn't want to work for us anymore. I thought the world of the guy. But when I looked in those eyes, those weird eyes peering at me, staring at me, I thought, holy crapo, if this guy wants to leave, fine.